and welcome to CXQA Live, the home of the agent-centric contact center philosophy. Every single week, we talk about how agents with the right training and tools and connection with your company are going to be a revenue, growth, and protection center for your business or brand. They're going to be the best diagnostic tool that you have for your business. Will ensure that your customers are going to be satisfied and connected. They're going to do more and better work, and they're going to want to stick around and contribute to the long-term success of your company. Now, we could come up with a lot of fun and clever names for today's episode. We could call this the CX Next in QA Live. We could call it the Robapalooza. Either way, today on the show, I'm joined by, for the very first time, a special guest, Rob Dwyer. Rob's VP of Customer Engagement at both the software company Happy2 and the BPO Customer Direct, as well as the host of the always an entertaining podcast Next in Queue. So, really happy you could join us, Rob.
Hey, thanks, Rob. And I see Milan is watching, and he suggested R2D1, and I kind of like that too.
Yeah, and Milan, you got a special role to play in today's episode for putting the Robs together, my friend. So glad you could join us for our time. So back to the other Rob on the screen. You've been in contact center world for quite a while. You've had multiple different types of roles. You've done different types of things. Why don't you give us just a bit of your background and tell us a little bit about your professional narrative?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. I started with Convergys. I think a lot of people will recognize that name. They're now Concentrics. And like so many people in this industry, I started as an agent, taking phone calls, working retention for one of the big three wireless telecoms out there. And I got into training, and that really was where my passion lied. And I trained for a long time with them, also doing leadership development and training, and got to travel all over the world with them, which was really exciting. And I was living in St. Louis at the time. And in 2016, I decided I wanted to work for a smaller company. And I got an opportunity with Customer Direct, which is a small family-owned BPO in St. Louis. And it was really exciting because I got to exert a lot more influence and do more interesting things with them. So I came in to really formalize a training department, and that was exciting. Led QA, really helped us in 2018 move to a work from home model. So we jumped into work from home, and I had experience with that with Convergys. So we did that long before the pandemic, and virtualizing training and kind of all the things that goes into that. And about 3 years ago, we launched a commercial software product, Happy2, which I also support. We've actually got a couple of products in that platform today, Happy2 Guide and Happy2 Vision. So we're doing speech analytics. We're doing agent-facing guidance. And it really is all about how do we help agents perform at their peak so that we're driving really great customer experiences. And that's what I really love, is how can I help organizations create really great customer experiences? And a big part of that is technology, but the biggest part is the people.
This, of course, for everyone watching, is obviously why Rob and Rob connect. Similar values, similar passions. We're really glad to have you on the show. It's probably a little overdue and a long time coming in some ways, just because of all the alignment that we have, but just really glad you could join us. And I really wanted to pick one of a million things we could pull out to discuss today. But there's a concept that you featured in a recent article you wrote for ICMI on rapport building, and the contact center rapport building is probably something that gets talked about in every training class. It's it's a concept that's broadly discussed, but I really appreciated the way that you kind of engaged it. And so you defined in the article rapport as being how we establish human connections, particularly at the beginning of a relationship. And so I'd like to just point out real quick that anytime you make a bunch of references, and you made a bunch of pop culture references. I mean, you had Elton John by way of The Wizard of Oz. You had a Fight Club reference, which always gets me, by the way. That's one of your sticks, my friend, is there's always connecting points to
Yeah.
the things that are out there in the world that are art, that people can connect the concept to what you're saying. And I appreciate it about you, the way that you approach content in general. But walk us through building rapport in the contact center and pretend like we know nothing and give us a primer.
I think the thing that is first and foremost most critical if you're an agent and you're trying to build rapport is to put on your ears and really listen. And it's really easy as an agent to get into the just doing the motions and not listening to what the other person is saying. And when you really listen to people, they give you all kinds of little clues, and sometimes they're really subtle about who they are, what they care about, what's important to them, what's happening in their lives right now. And those are things that can help you build rapport and build a connection if you pick up on them. But I think too often what happens is and, and this is our fault, right? The people who train agents, the people who put together quality rubrics, the people that listen to calls, we think of rapport building as this very specific thing where we ask very specific questions, and it's not. That connection that we get with every person is different. So, Rob, how you and I connect is different than how, for instance, Jacob and I connect, or Milan and I connect. How we came together and the things that we talked about that we were like, oh, I really like this about this person. Those are different for everybody. I remember with Milan, one of the things that I talked to him about very early on is he's a storm chaser, right? And I grew up in Tornado Alley. Like, we're going to talk about that, and that's very interesting to me, and that's one of the ways that we build rapport. So I think when we just are open-minded and we listen, there's an opportunity for us to find something within any other person that we're connecting with, to understand like who they are and really deepen that relationship.
Hmm. Well, I mean, the ability to meet somebody where they're at and create that connection is related to a certain degree of openness, right? And if
Mhm.
you think about being paid to have efficient and accurate interactions with humans, that doesn't necessarily translate into openness. And yet actual customer satisfaction often is correlative, if not causationally connected to the amount of rapport that is established. And so
Yeah.
there's an irony there, right? In the way that we tend to view the function of the contact center and the contact center agent within the business versus what actually drives the kind of customer and therefore business outcomes that helps the business. And I think that there's a lot of layers to be unpacked there, but um, there are a couple of questions from your article that I'd like to zero in on. You asked the question, are you hiring people who want to solve problems and make customers smile? Maybe you could just kind of elaborate on that question a little bit.
Yeah, I think all too often in the contact center world, and this is true of all kinds of different industries, but I think it's especially true in contact centers, that we look for experience in contact centers. And experience is not the most critical thing that someone can bring to that role. I knew a director who swore by hiring people who had worked as servers in restaurants. That was who she wanted. Find me people that have been successful as a server in a restaurant, and
Hmm.
I want them on my team handling phone calls. It's what's she looking for? She's not looking for experience. She's not looking for someone who is used to navigating multiple screens, multiple systems, and using a headset and all of those things. She was looking for someone who understood hospitality, understood meeting the customer's needs, and
Hmm.
understood doing all of that with a smile. That's what she wanted. And she was really successful at finding amazing people to work on that team and deliver amazing results.
Wow. It's interesting, you talked about experience, the ability to be human. Um, do you consider that a skill?
I do consider it a skill. I think how we interact with people is in fact a skill. It's a skill that we learn through the course of our lives and in different environments, and some people are really uncomfortable with that, and maybe it's not something that's for them, and some people are super comfortable interacting with people and learning about them. And when you identify people who are high potential in dealing with other people, those interpersonal skills, that's what I want on my team of people interacting with customers. I don't care that you're really good at navigating a system or that you understand how the billing works or this or that. Those things I can teach you. What I can't teach you is that desire to
Mm.
be engaged with other people and to want to help them. I can't teach you that.
Yeah. No, and I think that there's a desire on the part of most customers when they're calling into a contact center or even engaging in chat or email, and receiving support in any way, that they're not just treated like a number, and it's not just, okay, we just have this policy and this process and you fit in it wherever you fit in it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you told a story about an experience that you had, um, in the article, that kind of shocked you initially. You were sort of like, "Is this happening? Like, is this true?" Maybe you could tell that story for our audience.
Yeah. So, number one, I recently moved. So, I moved back to the Wichita, Kansas area around Easter. I had lived in St. Louis for 13 years. And so I'm still exploring some of the different places where I'm going to shop regularly, and was in a place that I hadn't been in before, relatively small retail outlet, but something everybody's heard of, right?
Mm.
And we go to check out, and we're in line, and the guy behind the counter, young guy, as we've got quite a few items, so it's going to take him a little while to scan everything. And he says, "Hey, uh, $5 off today if before I'm done scanning, you can name 5 Elton John songs." And I thought that was just brilliant because often when you're having these interactions, they're very stale. There's maybe no talking at all, or there's some forced conversation that seems really awkward. And this wasn't awkward. And one of the things that I love that he did was he allowed the focus to be on me while he did what he needed to do. He needed to scan, right? And he could listen and scanned at the same time. And that really was filling that dead air. If you think about it from a contact center perspective, it was just filling dead air. Like all of a sudden, I was filling the dead air and I was having fun doing it.
Right.
And I thought it was just a brilliant thing to do.
Well, and you detail how, like, another employee and the guy behind you in line get involved, and suddenly it's almost like, a shared human moment at the
It
checkout,
was
right?
it was like a game show. I had 2 people in line behind me. One guy is, like, whispering clues to me. The other associate who is there kind of bagging things is, like, kinda cheering me on. It was just one of those. It was not a normal experience. It stood out, and it made me want to go back there and experience something like that again. It was creative, it was interesting, and, um, I think those experiences that we have that are out of the ordinary, we really remember. And look, not every experience has to be like that. You can build rapport with someone in ways that are much simpler and maybe a little more, run of the mill, if you will.
Mhm.
But if you can do something extraordinary like that, it does a lot for your brand reputation, and it will absolutely sear into the memory of the person who is experiencing it.
I remember going through the drive-through with my father, and, my father was one of those people where he would have a quick, engaging conversation with a stranger in a heartbeat. And, when you go through the drive-through, of a fast food restaurant, you really don't know what kind of engagement there's going to be, and, and sometimes it's like, "Hi, how are you? Can I take your order?" And you get to the window and it's like, "Repeat the total, take your card, thank you, have a nice day." Um, and sometimes it's, pretty engaging, "How's your day going?" Or, "Thanks for coming to wherever. How can I take your order?" And whatever. So whenever my dad would have one of those experiences where it was the first case where it was just very robotic and minimal or just purely transactional, he would turn around and look at me and he'd go, "You got to pay extra for personality." And that stuck with me, because there is something engaging when someone recognizes they're dealing with another human that adds a kind of value that doesn't show up on the bottom line in an
Mm,
attributable way to the business, but you are more engaged with that brand and whatever service or product that you were there to get, whether it's a double cheeseburger or, your groceries, it changes the experience, it changes your view. And if you have other options for a substitute product or service, you're less likely to pursue them because you had a human moment, a human connection. Um, and I just to kind of pivot us a little bit, you specifically mention equipping agents. Um, I think about the work environments that many agents are in across the world, and they're not measured on anything that connects to the human. They're measured on performance in quality and efficiency terms typically, right? And so,
mhm.
um, I mentioned earlier a disconnect that I see in many cases with what's going to drive long-term positive business outcomes versus just trying to minimize the cost of the contact center. And we know we've talked about it on the show so many episodes that the reductionist view of the contact center as just being a necessary cost is nothing less than a lost opportunity. It's a lost opportunity for the vast majority of businesses, right?
Yeah.
So, how do you go about equipping your agents to build rapport, to see the value of rapport, but freeing them up to build rapport and equipping them to build rapport?
Yeah. Well, I you touched on something that I want to just back up on, and I think that is how we measure agents. And I think there is a change that is underway, and it may be slow coming, but the power of sentiment analysis, both to understand how your customer is kind of feeling at any given moment on a call and how your agent is presenting themselves and your brand, at any given moment on a call or a chat for that matter, that is changing a little bit the way that we look at agent performance. There are always going to be efficiency metrics. There are always going to be metrics that may be involved if you're in a sales program, right? Conversion rate and those types of things. And those are important. But I think we are on the cusp of where we can really start to measure some of that human factor that has previously really been very subjective.
Mm.
And I think it will remain to some extent subjective, but I think there's an objective way that we can start attaching performance measures to that. And when you do that, when you change what people are measured on, you change behavior.
100%.
So that's the start, right? If you are all of a sudden now looking at that piece, agents want to be more human. They want to have better interactions with customers because it's part of their goal, it's part of their scorecard. As far as equipping agents, a lot of it is taking the time to help them understand how they can make connections. And a lot of that is just whether it's in a role play or a mock call or listening to actual calls after the fact and really focusing in on what cues were presented and what could you have done to potentially make a connection. And some of that requires some relatively deep thinking, but those coaching sessions are an opportunity for us to think about who is this customer? What's important to them? How could I have made a better connection with them? And that fosters this environment or culture where we're thinking about our customers as people as well, instead of thinking about our customers as numbers or account holders or whatever the case may be. And when you do that, all of a sudden, those interactions are more human. The customers are having better experiences. The agents are having better experiences. And it becomes this virtuous cycle.
I just want to like zoom out on this for a minute, Rob, because you just described without describing it a certain level of awareness at the business level of the human realities that really pertain to that business's success and translating that to the agent. That was kind of your answer. That was my summary of your answer, right?
I like it.
But we typically talk about things like company culture. We talk about the horizontal and vertical relationships that exist within a company. We talk about the metrics, and I think you're completely right that what we measure any employee on is really going to directly drive specific behaviors. And we've had more than one episode that really went down that path pretty heavily, including identifying some very typically adopted metrics that might not be doing the right thing in those regards.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
And metrics that are viewed more narrowly than they should be. So the thing that I wanted to pause on just for a second is that this is a multiplicative input sort of thing. It's one of those things where saying the right thing at the all hands company meeting doesn't get the job done, right? This awareness has to permeate every aspect of the company, right down to why people get terminated and why people get promoted, right? Like if the guy who's really not good at his job because he's not nice to customers and he's not nice to his direct reports gets promoted, then the whole company says, actually, they say these other things matter, but in reality, what matters is this kind of behavior here. right?
Mhm.
And so it's almost like put your money where your mouth is. Like, companies have learned to say the right things much quicker than they've learned to represent the right things in many cases with the way that they actually carry out their business. So, like, you talked about those things in very um in typical Rob style. You just sort of, this is how it is, this is how it works, but there's a lot of depth in what you're saying as far as actually putting it into application. It's not, let's roll out a program about
Yeah,
rapport.
it
It's
is
not,
not
let's
that.
let's put a poster on the wall in the break room that says, "Don't forget rapport." It's not just, let's put a different metric in place. If we're fostering human connection and incentivizing and rewarding the right behaviors, and correcting and punishing the behaviors that we don't want to see, and if the backroom meetings look just like the front room meetings in the company, that's where you start to see the tide shift. And the frontline employees who are technically on the bottom of the hierarchy, they start to behave and engage, and I would argue in this case find fulfillment in the kinds of behaviors that are going to drive the long-term outcomes that we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the culture in an organization starts at the very top, right?
Mhm.
And it really is top down. And so if the executives in a company aren't fostering that culture, it won't exist. It doesn't really matter how hard everybody else is trying to make it just won't exist. It really does have to come from the top down. And so the question is for the leadership in a company, like what are you focusing on? What culture are you creating? Because if you really want to have, you know, a great customer experience, well, it starts with you. It starts with the leaders at the company. And it and you have to be intentional
Yeah.
about making sure that that culture does go all the way down to the front lines. It is there are processes you can put in place, but it's more than just the processes, right? You have to live it, you have to breathe it.
Well, and I think one of the easy things to miss there is that in order to live that kind of culture out as a leader, you have to invite other people to give you feedback on how
Mhm.
you're doing with that, and
Yeah.
and open yourself up in ways that honestly make a lot of executives very uncomfortable, and it tend to be relatively counterintuitive to what you learn in business school,
Mhm.
or maybe just completely separate from what you learn in business school. You can have the right strategies, the right policies, the right procedures. All the numbers can look great, but if all of the human value and culture dynamics are either completely off or they're fake and everybody knows it, then you will see that in the numbers eventually.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
going to show up.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, Listen, man, like, we could go down this, another hour, I think probably, but it's really been great having you on the show. We need to have you back again. Maybe we'll talk about Star Wars and the contact center, because there's got to be a reference that
Anytime,
we can
Rob,
make.
anytime.
Um, but I really appreciate you joining us. You're welcome anytime, my friend.
I appreciate it, Rob, and thanks for everybody who, dropped by to listen.
And we are gonna jump over to the discussion table for a few minutes for anybody who has time right after I push the big red button here. Go make your Tuesday better. Talk soon.